Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Ephrata Community Church Weekly Podcast, a conversation with our pastors and leaders meant to continue encouraging you to know God, know freedom, know purpose, and make a difference.
Hey, Ephrata Community Church, great to be with you this morning. I get to be with Dan Gulnac, the service pastor from this past weekend. He does a great job, I think.
Oh, thanks, man.
Well done. There was a lot of announcements. We are just putting children into this world, aren't we?
Good night.
Family news
It's a good
is
thing. It's a good
weddings
thing.
and babies.
It's a beautiful thing.
That's right. And you
Yep.
did joke, and I loved it in one of the services, evangelization through procreation.
That's
is
right,
one way to
man.
get the job done.
It is one of the ways we do things around here.
And I just want to give a special shout out to Moses, who was born on July 7th, my birthday.
Ooh,
It's good to share
nice.
a birthday with that wonderful little joy that landed in one of our community's families this year. So,
That's great.
hey, we're in the Esther series, and I hope you've been enjoying it as much as us. As many of you know, we have a reading guide. So it's just been a lot of fun to journey with the community. And I kicked off the message this weekend by talking about how we went around the huddle last week at the staff huddle, and different people just shared, hey, man, this stood out to me. And just some of the things that were shared were so profound. Enjoyed it. Were you there that day?
I was not. I was out of town.
If you would have been there that day and you said, what is something, we would have posed the question, what is something that's standing out this time reading through? What do you think you would have said?
Well, I would have said, watch my sermon from 2 days ago.
You're right.
Next.
That was
it. Right?
That's
so,
right.
I mean, that's the privilege we have of being communicators up front.
That's right.
But what a cool thing. I wish I was there because I love community hermeneutic. Right. And we've got you all know, we have incredible, sharp people on our team.
Yeah.
And so just to hear the way that they were working through scripture. And of course, I too would have been just surprised about the profundity of Chris Weber.
Oh no, Chris just comes out of nowhere with just fireworks.
We love you, Chris.
Chris, you're awesome sauce. Yeah, but remember, I launched it by saying, hey, Chris realized that Artaxerxes tried to go and mess with Greece, and Greece just turned him around, and he had to go home and he had to do brand management, I called it.
No, it was
where you had to go back and he had to make it look like raise the energy level again, tone set, or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And man, there's just so much of that in the world today, right? And just how particularly I think when you're in a political cycle like we are, but man, there's a lot of countries in a political cycle.
Yeah.
I mean, Netanyahu's here speaking because he's
Absolutely.
got something coming up. You have stuff going on in different European nations, and outside of that, there's just a lot of brand management going on. And God bless it. I don't mean that insincerely, but I love that in the midst of all that, God drops this little narrative around Mordecai and Esther, and he says, you want to know the real story? And he just sews it in, and I just want to celebrate God's goodness in that.
Yes.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, and you can go big like that, or you can just even go into our own lives, right? So the ways we distract ourselves and the ways that we try to soothe ourselves and all of these things.
Buy another toy, retail therapy, anything, right?
When things aren't going well for us. And in the same way, in a smaller way, God just looks at us and says, I love what you said this weekend in one of the services where it's like, oh, bless your heart. I had a grandmother from Texas. And so
they say
my grandma,
no
when she said, oh, bless your heart, it really meant you're an idiot.
That's right.
You know what I mean? But I don't think that's what God,
learn.
I don't think that's what God meant. But God just says back, it's like, oh, I'm right here.
Yeah.
And I got this all under control.
That's right. The nations plot. And I love what the psalmist says there. I believe it's David. The nations band together.
Mm-hmm.
And, there wasn't a lot of that in his day. He might have saw it with some petty warlord kings. But in general, the theme there is you can take all of our might and put it together. And I believe it's from all of history.
Yep.
And it doesn't even register as the dust on the scales of heaven, right?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, he's got it all under control. And I think one of the things I loved was, and I could feel it in the room, and I think we'll probably get there, but in the ministry afterwards, I mean, I think I was overwhelmed by what it meant for our community just to step in and be like, yes, that's right. Like, God is in control of all of this.
Me too. I was a bit surprised disproportionately how the Spirit used a simple reflection around God's sovereignty to reassure some people that I consider are quite deep in the faith.
Yep.
I mean, I had Mike Wenger come today. He goes, I came in heavy. And it's Mike Wenger, who's one of our lead counselors at Thrive Counseling Services. And Mike wouldn't mind me saying this, but he was just like, I came in heavy and I was carrying some stuff. And he said, the Lord met me with a reminder that I'm surrounded by his sovereignty, right?
Yep.
And I just love that the Lord did that. And, the passage that I used for it is a fun passage there in Esther 6. And I chose that passage because no one but God, only God could do what he did there, where he keeps a king up, makes sure the right book's in front of a king, and then brings in Haman. In other words, the Lord is not just releasing a blessing for Mordecai, but he's dealing with Mordecai's accusers at the exact same moment. And friends, I don't care all of the planning Mordecai and Esther were doing around banquets and things. We give our best efforts to God, but there are certain things that only God can show up and do. So for Mike, he can be wrestling through the best doctors around his diagnosis with MS, and he can be doing his best care for himself. He can be making sure he takes his vitamins and his meds, making sure he does his exercise. We do what we can do, but there comes a point where the Lord alone says, I have this, right? And that got ministered to a lot of people.
For sure. And I think it's a dynamic tension we live in, just like we live in the tension between the already and the not yet kingdom. Yeah. It's the tension that you can go one way, which is God is sovereign, so I'm going to not do anything, and he'll move if he wants to, versus I'm going to white knuckle, live in works righteousness to make things happen on my own, right? And neither, as everything is, like neither's right. So there is a time to fast. There is a time to take a step of faith. Right. There is a time to hear from the Lord and believe that even though you don't have full revelation, he's calling you to move towards what he's doing. But there's also the reality in which while you're doing that, God is doing things through his sovereignty that have nothing to do with you. And I would say even what happens out of your best efforts may not be what you're looking for, because he's got something else going on. And so what a fun passage, because you come from, and even the way that, you and I back to back speaking, you come from this, okay, this is what Mordecai and Esther are doing. That's right. And in the midst of them doing things and living faithfully, we get
God's doing what they can't even see and
they
imagine.
Don't even know what's going on.
More than they could ask or imagine, right?
Yeah.
I had a couple come to me, Dan, your talking reminded me of someone I had a chance to minister at the end, a wonderful couple, well-loved in our congregation. They believed about a year and a half ago to step out in the Lord's leading to start a business. And they've had some thin times, some difficult times, and I'm aware of this, and they just stayed afterwards because they felt the Lord inviting them to welcome his sovereignty in. And it was so wonderful to be standing there talking with them. And of course, there were tears involved. It's like, we have done everything we know how to do. We couldn't be working harder. And they were just simply saying, all we're left with is this turning and this appeal to, Lord, do what only you can do.
That's right.
And the wife admitted to me, she goes, it's really hard to hear another word about abide. God's going to show up. When you're from this county too. You feel like you can work your way into getting the breakthrough. And there was no doubt, like even as the words would come out of her mouth, she knew what the word was to her and her husband, that I have this. You take your hands off the oars. Like we sit there and we're pulling on the oars in the midst of the storm, even though Jesus is in the boat. Yeah. And we think that's going to solve something. And so it was just so wonderful to be able to say, let sovereignty run its course in this one now. Wow. Like, in other words, quit that wrestling. Can I tell you about another fun conversation I had?
Yeah.
There was another point that I made, and I said, the Lord throttles his sovereignty. And I chose that word because it's just such a fun verb. You're like, what do you mean? And
I'm glad you're going here. I was about to ask.
I know you're about to bust on me for this or something.
No, I just wanted to talk about this more. So.
Please, let's talk. Well, I'll tell you about a conversation. I want to hear your thoughts. I ran into Brett Morey afterwards. Brett was a big part of last year. He and his wife, Sandy, helping set up the Compassion International Adoption. So Brett's amazing wonderful. Stuff. And I saw him after the 8:30 service, and Brett goes, yeah, Jim, when you threw out that point about God throttles his sovereignty, I have to sit there, and he says, at first I'm like, where's Jim heading with this one? How's he going to land this one? I love when people doubt, because truthfully, I too am not always sure exactly how it's going to land. So Brett and I were just joking, and he goes, it dawned on me while you were talking. that God's grace is him throttling his sovereignty.
That's right.
I mean, just let's think about that thought. Like, he throttles his rightful justice
That's right.
so that grace can be released, right?
Yep.
And man, that is a beautiful thought. That grace, the incarnation, is throttled sovereignty to be able to encounter us and to believe for a better thing, not just in the world, but rightness in the
Yep.
world. Takes a throttled God sometimes, because God has every right to do what he does. Anyway, I just thought that was a fun example of someone sitting there, and I didn't even say that. Just like, wow, grace is throttled justice.
You got people. We have people being skeptical the whole time.
That's right, and smarter than us.
That's
I was like, man, that'll preach,
good.
Brett.
That's good, yeah, for sure. Well, the key thing now on that phrase for me, I wasn't skeptical, by the way.
No,
I didn't. But was the relationship sake part. And the reality is, I mean, at one of the services you said, I don't want a God I understand.
That's right.
I don't want a God I can figure out. And so if we know and we believe that he is so far, thoughts above our thoughts and ways above our ways, and we just can't, I mean, if he was to unveil his glory to us, we couldn't even handle it, right? And yet, because he wants relationship with us, he chooses time and time again to throttle.
And I remember the shadow side of that. It feels, when you start to get it, like, Lord, thank you. Thank you for being willing for relationship's sake to throttle.
Yep.
But there's a shadow side too, that because God throttles, certain things happen in this world that are not his will.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we love that he throttles, but we just wish that we had control over when he did.
Exactly right. And so whether it's a loved one that passed away unexpectedly, or whether or not it's a hope deferred around a dream or a vision or something, we have to admit there's a part of it where we can't answer. Like, Dan, one of the things you said the other week is like, it is a form of human trafficking that Esther ends up where she's at, right? And someone could rightfully say, well, hold it. Does that mean God is supporting human trafficking because of for such a time as this? And it's like, hold a second. You don't automatically have to make that leap. No. God makes lemonade out of lemons, right? God the scriptures tell us he works all things together for good. He does not control all things. The promise is this: I'm meticulously involved. I will work all things toward good that are given over to me. And so, we can't sit here and exactly describe how Esther ended up in the situation she did. Such a little crazy backstory, or how Mordecai was there. But we can say this: what God did with that moment is God's goodness and sovereignty showing up. Yeah,
I mean, I was on my way in today, and I was thinking about this point, specifically meticulous involvement versus meticulous control, and was thinking about, man, I mean, philosophers and theologians have
spent a lot of time, dude. Believe me, I'm condensing some stuff.
Working through this. And so there's a lot of big questions, and there's a lot of wrestling that's unpacked, or that's packed into these two things. But I think I really enjoyed the way that you put this, because that is the wrestling we do. But at the end of the day, the step of faith, to be a person of faith, is to believe that rooted in his sovereignty, when he chooses to execute his sovereignty, whether it's by control or involvement, is really his call.
Exactly right. And even I remember I mentioned it. Mordecai looks at Esther and says, I know one thing's for sure: God will save the Jews.
That's right.
Perhaps. Perhaps you've been brought up for such a time.
It's your...
That is a beautiful tension between, there's one thing I know he's going to do meticulous control around. That is, he's going to save the Jews. Another thing he does, like I always say this, 7% of Old Testament prophecy is absolute prophecy. It's going to happen regardless. And if someone stands in the way of it, King Cyrus, you'll wake up one morning and decide to release the Jews so they can go home, so that my son can be born, where I promised David. Don't mess with an absolute prophecy of God. He will make it happen. But outside of that 7%, 84% of Old Testament prophecy is conditional. If my people who are called by name will humble themselves and pray, then, if-then statements. And that's meticulous involvement. I will heal this land. I'm inviting you to be a part of doing it.
That's right.
And so I just get really excited about this thing. And that's also, I put in there for relationship's sake. I just realized when I was up sharing this weekend, it's not just relationship's sake, it's for growth. His sovereignty being throttled is so you can grow. And I gave the example of Renner trying to water the plants, right? I'm trying to develop this child at the same time throttling the fact that I want to get done watering these plants, but my call is I want to develop this child. So I joked it takes twice as long and it's a lot more messier. I love how you picked up on it. Like, you get water all over yourself.
That's right.
But Renner learned something about what it means to rely on my strength and sovereignty, but to be involved in what's going on.
Yeah. Yep. And I think, when it comes to this last point you had, which is how a sovereignty surrounds your situation, there's more at work than your circumstances and your resources. Yeah. What I thought about was, okay, so how does sovereignty impact the things that I'm going through? Right.
That's right.
And
how do I factor it in?
How do I factor that in? And I'm thinking about all of the prayer requests that we know, because we have just a privilege of pouring over 7-8 pages a week. Yeah. And that's just a piece of what's going on in our community, and wrestling with those real big questions. And I'm a simple guy, and to come up on your Old Testament prophecy percentages there. For me, the 16% of the things that I know bring me an awful lot of peace when I've got nothing else.
Exactly right. That's right.
They really do.
That's right.
And it does not, it does not discount my hope in his involvement.
Oh, no. No.
Like, I'm perfectly
it doesn't
okay
make
with
me
that.
apathetic.
So
it
if I have a friend that's sick and I'm asking for breakthrough in cancer, right? I know that they will be healed. They have a new body awaiting for them in heaven if they're a believer. And I find great peace in that.
That's right. Yeah.
But man, do I still contend on my knees that he would involve,
trust me,
and break through and bring healing tomorrow. And I'm so thankful. I don't know. I have had the opportunity. Let me put it this way: I have had the opportunity to walk with people that don't have that surety.
That's right. To
live from. And man, it's living in a boat that's ready to capsize any minute.
That's right. So for you as a community, we just, as we're wrapping this up, I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming All of God stuff. But I just want to remind you, you are surrounded by sovereignty. And I don't always know how you can apply that or step into that. But do know this, like Dan just said, sit. I just always have the picture of those disciples in the boat in the storm. Jesus is in the boat asleep, and they're there working at the oars. We're just saying this: go ahead and just let go of the oars, because even Jesus in your boat asleep is better than you in your best days of being able to figure out how to pull on those oars. Sovereignty surrounds you. So I just want to say the All of God night. I just want to remind you all. I was holding a conversation with someone this morning. They're like, man, how do we feel about bringing someone in to bring the presence of God? And we just joked together, like, the presence of the Lord is here.
Yep.
There is no magical thing. We just know this, though, that certain people who've wrestled over something, we believe as a community, they receive a bit of authority and a bit of an impartation. And it doesn't mean that they're the magic key to the presence of the Lord rising in our midst. Who would not say that we have that already? But it is a time when we call the region around meditating on the presence of God. And we believe that someone can come and be able to say, I have something to be able to offer y'all, in the sense of praying for you and believing for you to be able to experience some things I see happening in other parts of the world. And so we're so encouraged on September 20th. John Bevere will be here 7 to 9 on Friday night. You need to register for that. And friends, feel free to register friends, get in touch with them. And again, we offered you just some resources around the book, The All of God, the transformational effects of the fear of the Lord in our lives. And we commend it to you. Of course, that's up to you, but
you will not regret reading it.
Oh, no, it's good.
That's for sure.
40 entries. You can do over 40 days. It'll take you right up to the beginning. And we would encourage it. You might hear us alluding to some things we saw in that book ourselves. Yeah. Anything else, Dan?
I'd just say, hey, listen, we didn't even ask John to come.
No.
And the Lord's in that, and I'm curious about what he's up to.
Oh, trust me.
This. So I'm super excited. I can't wait.
I am available to the Lord and his servants.
Absolutely.
All right, people, we appreciate you, and Dan and I, as well as the whole team. Hope you have a wonderful week. Take care.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you've been encouraged by listening. You can listen to previous episodes, find additional resources, and of course, learn more about us at EphratahCommunityChurch.com.